Where's the sweet tea at? What? I don't know. We got some. You had some? They were talking about it.
It was overwhelming.
I think I played.
It's coming out nice. This is a good quality camera. All right, I took a lot.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And then, oh, this is the same camera too.
It's a Pixel set. Me, my wife and I, a couple years ago, we used to have flip phones. And we flew to Portland, Oregon airport. He picked us up and he said, "We're not going to eat. We're not going to walk. We're going directly to the prizes."
Me too. We gotta get.
This was here yesterday.
Okay. It was.
Like this, and then the top space needs to like, oh, wonderful.
Go straight up in there. That's what happened.
Wow.
Let me. Oh, that's sweet.
Welcome to Elaine Massacre, motherland of the civil rights. I would like to acknowledge our mayor, Mr. Michael Craven, who's here, and Dr. Olson. I would like to thank her for inviting me to be a part of this program. I want to welcome you all. It's not often that we get our stories told. African American history and other ethnicities are rarely recorded in the textbook. So it is a great honor for you all to come and share your oral stories, your oral histories with us, and continue to do the work that you do. We want to especially welcome Mr. Paul Ortiz and Mr. Michael Brandon for the work that you've done and the work that you continue to do. So welcome to Elaine, and I hope you will return again. So thank you again for coming and welcome everyone in the audience. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I think we're going to do an invocation. Reverend Rand?
Let us pray. Our Father, we come to you this morning, Heavenly Father. Thank you for the many blessings that you have bestowed upon us, Heavenly Father. We thank you for allowing our visitors that are coming from different areas, Heavenly Father, wrapped in your arms of love, guidance, and protection, Heavenly Father. We pray that this meeting, Heavenly Father, will be a success, Heavenly Father, memorial to our area. And we ask, Heavenly Father, that you lead, guide, and direct whatever we're going through today, Heavenly Father. Bind us together and give us that love that continues to flow from heart to heart, Heavenly Father. And when it's all over and done, Heavenly Father, here we ask that the impact be an everlasting one, Heavenly Father, bringing generations into the knowledge of the things that have taken place, Heavenly Father, and the forgiveness and the love that's being shared right now, Heavenly Father. As you continue to go with us, guide us, forgive us for our sins, and cast them from us, Heavenly Father. We want to thank you, we want to lift you high, give you honor and glory for all the things that you do, the things that you have done, and what you're getting ready to do. Bless us to continue to lift you up and give you praise, honor, and glory. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Reverend Lamb. And to start with, I want to make sure that everyone, does everyone here have a pen? A free light-up pen? If you don't, our goal is to go back to the University of Florida with empty boxes. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the materials that we have for you. First of all, my name is Paul Ortiz, and I'm the director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program and a professor of history at the University of Florida. And on behalf of the University of Florida, I want to thank you so much, Elaine Legacy Center, Dr. Mary Olson, and the entire community. Mr. Mayor, thank you as well for inviting us to travel all the way from Gainesville, Florida, where UF is based, to Elaine, Arkansas. And I want to talk just a few minutes about how we got from Gainesville to Elaine. We didn't take a first-class plane ticket. right? But what we do every summer at the Oral History Program at the University of Florida is we go on fieldwork trips, and we try to get outside of the classroom, because we believe a lot of important learning happens outside of the classroom, talking to elders, talking to people who have lived through and have made history. And here in Elaine, you have made history over and over and over again. And the sign you have, Elaine, the motherland of the civil rights movement, is a very important sign. Because in fact, Elaine is a motherland of the civil rights movement. When we started our fieldwork project, we called it the Mississippi Freedom Project. I do want to pay homage to one individual who some of you have already talked to some of you about her, and I know you know her. When we started going to the Mississippi Delta, when I arrived at the University of Florida in 2008, we take about 12 to 15 students to do oral history interviews with veterans of the civil rights movement. And to this day, we still do that. But our guide in the early years was a courageous organizer with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee by the name of Margaret Law. And Margaret was actually the SNCC project director in Bolivar County in the mid-1960s. Her older brother Sam was a leader of SNCC also. Margaret actually had to leave Bolivar County under the threat of death. In the late 1960s, there was literally a price on her head. And we got to know her over the years because she moved back to the Mississippi Delta in the early 2000s to take care of her mother, who had taken ill. And so Margaret lived in Cleveland. She welcomed us every year. She opened every possible door for us. Margaret Block was the kind of person you don't say no to. Does anyone know anyone like that? I remember one time we were parked out in front of Parchman Prison, and Margaret said, you're a historian, Paul. And we were in the car. I was driving. Margaret was in the passenger seat, and her goddaughter was sitting in the back of the car. And another thing I found out about Margaret was I would run into people all over the country who would say, oh yeah, Margaret Block is my godmother. I'd say, wow, how many godchildren does she have? One of them is Curtis Austin, who wrote a wonderful book in the Black Panthers called Up Against the Wall. It's the best book in the Black Panthers. Another one of her godsons is Akmieli Umoja, who wrote a book called We Will Shoot Back about the armed defense and the civil rights movement. So anyway, we're sitting in this car, and Margaret says, you're a historian. We need to get in there, and we're going to do a tour of this prison. I said, Margaret, I don't really want to go into the Parchman prison. That's okay. She got out of the car and marched to the kiosk. And I don't know what she said to the guard, but within a matter of minutes, we were in Parchman, being given a tour by the warden. It was incredible. So Margaret could open doors. So fast forward to now. For many years, Margaret would say, you know, the Delta is not just Mississippi, Paul, it's Arkansas. And I said, I know that, Margaret, but we just don't seem to have time to get over there. So every year Margaret would say, when are you going to get to Arkansas? And then she introduced us to John, who I think, John, you came over one year to join us in Mississippi. And Margaret, of course, passed away a few years ago. So my only regret about being here is that Margaret was not here to realize that we finally said, yes, Margaret, we made it to Arkansas. So we're just so happy to be here. I wonder if our students could just stand real quickly and just raise their hands. They've been doing oral history interviews the whole week throughout. We arrived yesterday, actually the day before yesterday. You served us dinner, you have given us lunch. I think you've given us every meal. In fact, my wife called me and she said, it sounds like you're never going to leave Elaine, Paul. They just keep serving you food. And so, again, I want to thank you for the welcome. This morning, the program, there's a little bit of a modification because we had a couple folks, unfortunately, had to cancel out. Now, originally, I wasn't really going to talk that much. Mike Brandon, who's originally on the schedule, Mike is a brilliant teacher of civil rights. Mike drove down from Durham, North Carolina, got to Athens, Georgia, and his throttle went out. And so Mike wasn't able to make it. And Zohara Simmons was another person who was going to speak. Zohara was the SNCC project coordinator for Laurel, Mississippi, and she wasn't able to make it. But I think we have a real treat, though, in store for you this morning, because we have another real live teacher. Now, I'm just a professor, but we have a person who actually teaches in public schools who's going to talk to us about teaching civil rights history in the public schools and how to do that effectively. And before I go any further, I'm actually going to introduce her. She's sitting right in the front. And this is a teacher by the name of Chris Duryea, who's a graduate of the University of Florida. She went on this trip 2 times when she was an undergraduate, I believe. She currently is working on her Master's of Arts degree at Johns Hopkins University. And she currently teaches at the Baltimore County Public Schools. She's also taught in the Baltimore City School system. And teaches U.S. history, African American history, facing the Holocaust. Next year is, I believe, a new course that you're developing. And we'll be teaching at Pikesville High School, again, for the Baltimore County Public Schools. So please join me in welcoming Chris Duryea. So what we're going to do is we're going to do kind of a split presentation. And does everyone have a program? And we'll just review that real briefly and talk about how the morning is going to go. Now, it's currently 9:33, so I'm assuming we're just going to be running everything here maybe 30 minutes forward. But we'll have this morning, Chris and I are going to do kind of a co-presentation. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then Chris is going to go, and then I'll come back. And then we're going to do 2 kind of breakout sessions. So we're going to divide down the middle, and you may want to kind of think now which of the sessions you want to sit in on. And Chris is going to lead, do it down here into 2 groups. I guess when we get to around 11 o'clock, we will split. Chris will lead the Teaching Civil Rights to high school, to high schoolers. And I encourage you, especially if you're an educator, working with young people or church groups or community groups, go to that group because Chris is going to be able to give you a lot of good hands-on, nuts and bolts advice on teaching civil rights and related topics. And then I will facilitate, and I stress the word facilitate, the discussion about implications for Elaine reparations strategies. And as an outsider, I just want to be very clear about this. I'm not here to tell you in Elaine, in Arkansas, how to do things. I want to listen, I want to learn. And especially in this topic of reparations, it's a very important topic. We're talking about reparations now nationally. There have been congressional hearings, there will be more. There's discussions on a level I never thought would happen. It's a very important discussion. But when we get in that session, I'm there to take notes. I will primarily be a note taker for that. So we'll have those 2 breakout sessions. Black Lane, the exploitation of black labor as being central to a local regional story in the Delta. But we also want to think about the Elaine Massacre in a national and international context. And what I mean by this is that the Elaine Massacre happens during a time. How many of you have heard of the phrase Red Summer? Okay, so a lot of us already know what Red Summer is. So Red Summer is this time when there's scores of anti-black massacres. We used to call them race riots, but now we call them massacres. Why is that? And here, I use my military background, because like I said, I was raised in a military family. I'm a 3rd generation combat veteran. I fought in Central America in the mid-'80s. What I've observed in the Elaine Massacre, which by the way, many of the murders were committed by federal troops, okay? And by a machine gun battalion. I don't know if you know what that means. Machine gun battalion was a highly mechanized battalion that fought in the World War I era. But what I've observed of these massacres, Elaine 1919, Chicago 1919, East St. Louis, 1917. Tulsa, 1921. The Ecoe Election Massacre in Florida, 1920. Equally horrific. What I've observed is that these were military campaigns against black communities. They were military campaigns because they involved, number one, intelligence. The white men involved in these massacres, the federal troops, the state militia, had to know how to target, who to target in black communities, how to strike terror, where to burn down businesses, which churches to strike. Okay, so that involves intelligence. That's advanced planning. 2, supply and resupply. Now I know you all have watched Westerns on TV and the movies, but I'm here to tell you that a man firing a gun can't just keep firing it like for 2 hours. That only happens in Hollywood, right? You have to have ammunition, you have to be resupplied. And so part 2 is that every one of the massacres I looked at between 1917 and 1923, and I'm going to talk about why that time period is important in a moment, involved both intelligence in advance, supply and resupply. Because anytime you're involved in a campaign where you're shooting more than a few minutes, you've got to be resupplied. I say this, I taught my nephews how to hunt, or my wife's nephews, I should say, in Alabama. And ammunition is not just something you carry around in huge stockpiles. You have to be resupplied. The third thing is what happens after these massacres. Because in every case that I'm aware of, powerful white people end up with things that black people used to have. Here, especially, it's land. In Chicago, it's buildings, neighborhoods that are lost. In Tulsa, it's the entire black business district, which at one point was called Black Wall Street, is destroyed. And what happens is white elite people take over all of that land, that property. How many of you are familiar with the work of John Hope Franklin? Great historian. So John Hope Franklin, and I got to know Dr. Franklin when I was a grad student at Duke. His family were in the process of moving to Tulsa, Oklahoma, on the eve of the massacre. In fact, his father had just put out his shingle. His father, Buck Franklin, was an attorney, and the massacre happened. White elites control this operation and just destroy the entire black business district of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And when John Hope Franklin was growing up, his father represented many African Americans in Tulsa in small claims courts to try to help them get their land or their property, or to try to get reparations for the things they had lost. And John Hope said, and you have to remember he's in his mid-80s when he's giving this lecture, he says, as a young boy, I'd be in the courtroom with my father. And it was so devastating because as an attorney, he was trying to get his clients' property back or their valuables back, their belongings, everything they had that they lost in that anti-black massacre. And the judge and the whole court system forbade all the attorneys from mentioning the massacre. You weren't even allowed to use the term riot in 1921. And so he said, imagine how hard it is for an attorney to try to get land and property back in a court if you're not even allowed to explain how it was lost. And so Buck Franklin won some of the cases, but lost a lot of cases. So again, that's a bit of a broader overview. What I'm trying to do is to connect Elaine with this broader series of anti-black massacres and, frankly, pogroms. The third thing to remember is that this was a time period where African Americans all across the country had made important gains. They were beginning to mobilize politically more effectively than they had in previous decades. There's the Great Migration. Don't forget that story. A lot of African Americans are moving from the Arkansas Delta to Chicago, to Memphis, to East St. Louis, and they're beginning to accrue some political power. Not a lot, but enough to begin to swing some national elections. And most importantly, in the South, and Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois documents this in 1911 in a brilliant series of studies on black land ownership, African Americans are purchasing land as never before, and they're making it productive. And even in many cases, purchasing land, still having to work for powerful plantation owners and stuff like that, but beginning to accrue larger amounts of land. And my students, when I show them the census in the early 20th century, they're always surprised. I haven't used the Phillips County, but I could use the Phillips County like any others. I used that rural Florida panhandle. And if you're familiar with the rural Florida panhandle, now you're talking about a very rural area. And I show them the rates of black land ownership around 1919. And my students are always astonished. They're like, 40% of black farmers own their own land? That's incredible. But that's a statistic that's not unusual. I would suspect that in the Arkansas Delta, a lot of counties have a similar kind of statistic. The Elaine Massacre targets black land ownership. The Ocoee Massacre, 1920, targets black land ownership. Because what happens in Ocoee in the wake of that is black farmers who own significant, in this case, orange groves, because now we're talking about Orange County, Florida, lose their land or have their land stolen from them. And we have accounts of black landowners being marched into the county courthouse and being forced to sell their land for a pittance, maybe $1 an acre. But they have to do this because of the massacre, because they've just been hit by this massive wave of violence, and then they have to leave. So I want us to think about these race riots don't happen in a vacuum. The last thing I'll mention is what's happening in the early 20s to land values all across the South. It's the land boom. Okay, now we know what happens in the 30s is the Depression, and that kind of overpowers our historic imagination. But 1917 to 1920, early 20s in Florida, we call it the Florida land boom. Suddenly, a lot of the land that African Americans are on, how many of you heard that phrase, the bottoms? Okay, so African Americans frequently have purchased land on what was called the bottoms, wherever they could. If the bottoms were in Gainesville, Florida, or I'm sure you have them in Arkansas, East Texas, Houston, Bayou City. The land, they worked hard on the land, but suddenly with rising land values, that land is very, very valuable.
Diverse narratives as part of a multicultural curriculum leads to an increase in student self-worth because inclusion of these histories reflects the importance of their own history and culture and validates their own experiences. Education, I feel, is usually set up where, there's the teacher and they're just passing all this knowledge out to the kids, but that doesn't recognize the fact that every single one of your kids is going to walk through this stuff you don't know. Every single one of your kids has something they're able to teach you. And if you go into doing history and you just assume, hey, I have all the knowledge, and you're just going to sit there and soak it up, you're missing out on half the entire experience. The inclusion of diverse perspectives also enables students to critically evaluate whose stories are we telling as part of American history and why. This kind of critical thinking aligns with Common Core state standards. Again, as a teacher, you gotta always tie it back to the laws and the standards. And Common Core pushes a lot of that critical thinking. So if we open dialogues with students and ask, hey, why are we telling this story and not this story? Why do you know about this and not that? The story of Emmett Till is part of the 6th grade curriculum in Baltimore City schools. I did not learn about that story until I was 22, 23 years old. So in the city, my 6th graders are at least getting more of the history than I was given. Also, when you engage in those critical thinking skills, you can empower students by putting them in a position to take agency for their own learning, take ownership of what they're interested in pursuing. for them to be able to make connections between themselves and what they're being taught. And that also opens it up for connecting what you're teaching to action, to social justice. Okay, we're learning about this, now what are we going to do about it? And if we have a history curriculum that is only telling the story from one point of view, how are we going to teach diverse kids to take pride in themselves if we're not teaching them anything about where they came from? And not just kids of color, not just, kids of diversity, all kids. What message are white kids going to get if they don't hear about the amazing things that people who aren't white have done? The erasure of different narratives within this country's history promotes the idea that American history is the same as white history, and it's not. The teaching of race-neutral or colorblind history ignores the struggles of oppressed groups and makes light of the significant contributions of so many Americans that shaped the evolution of the nation. And that's a lot of what Dr. Ortiz focuses on. These things that we don't teach in school, but are still a very crucial, vital part of American history. We don't live in a post-racial America. Segregation and Jim Crow policies are present in every county and every parish across the country. White landowning males that once constituted the entirety of voters. So when our country was made, those are the only people who could vote. A very, very narrow subset, not just white, not just men, you had to be rich white men. And in some places, it had to be Protestant. You couldn't even vote if you were a rich white man and you're Catholic. And that tiny subset of everyone is who the government was created by, and still who tends to get the most benefit from the way our government is structured. These power structures perpetuate economic, ethnic, and gender barriers and prevent us reaching true equity. Chicago native Chance the Rapper says that the problem is that my generation was pacified into believing racism existed only in our history books. If we don't confront the legacy and the ongoing impact of segregationist policies, we're doing all our students a disservice. If students only see the accomplishments and influence of white Americans, can we really expect them to come to any other conclusion than that some white people are somehow better than other people, if we're only teaching them what white people did? These misplaced attitudes of superiority influence acts of violence committed against people of color as recent as this week. And while the increasing numbers of shootings and ICE raids can be seen when you turn on the news, there's tons of acts of violence against minority groups that don't make it into textbooks, they don't make it on the news. You're from Elaine, you know.
And people will readily agree with us until they then say, we share the common themes of oral history, murder, and transgenerational trauma in every oral history of Elaine. But any academic who's being paid by one of the elites will say, show it to me. Where's your documentation? Show me the deeds. How do we make oral history as true as the academic?
Hello, everybody. I'm James D.K. Pope from Memphis, Tennessee. I'm a son of the 60s, coming out of the military in the mid-60s. I got involved in the civil and human rights movement as a student and became part of the first group of African Americans that became students at Memphis State University then, which is now the University of Memphis. We formed the first Black Student Association. We were responsible for the first African American professors and administrators to be hired there at the University of Memphis. We were part of the labor movement, the ASPOHP movement that eventually worked along with the sanitation workers there in Memphis. And of course, Dr. King was called to come and help us with that movement. We had personal meetings with Dr. King. I had a chance to touch him, and we thought that he was a super great man, and we still think that. many things that we've been involved in that area. Many firsts I've been a part of. I was the first president of the Black Student Association coming out of the military. Reparations, financial reparations, yes, that should be on the table. But the greatest reparation that any of us can get is the reparation of knowledge, and that is knowledge of self. Knowledge of the wonderful contributions that you offer to the world. And of course, I tell black people that you made tremendous contributions to the world. And that is the greatest reparations that you can get, is the knowledge of yourself. Black people don't understand that they think at some point in time that we've been told that we're a little bit less than other people on the planet Earth. But I'm here to tell you that black is not a color, first of all. Black is an essence. Black is the essence that all other colors come from. Regardless of you white, brown, red, you come from Mother Black, Mother Earth, if you will. So, again, reparations, we have to have it on the table, but just know that it's not all about money. It's about knowledge of self. Thank you.
I believe it's afternoon now. So good afternoon. My name is Dennis Williams. I'm from North Little Rock, Arkansas. Grew up just up the road. I think someone said they was from the Malton area. I'm from Holly Grove, and I'm here as a guest of a friend of mine from church. I'm glad to be here. I also teach in high school, so I cover pretty much anything that you teach in high school, regardless of the class. I teach it in my program, which is ROTC. So we're trying to have a majority of students are female. I'd say 65% of the class is female, African-American females at that. So I always have speakers come in, especially females who come in and talk to them to help them become maybe more of a young lady versus a young troublemaker, I'll put it that way. Same thing with my young African-American males, Hispanic males, and Hispanic females. And then, but I do have students from all races and backgrounds as well. So I teach them to learn how to get along with one another, how to go out and meet people, how to shake someone's hand, look up in the eye and speak. All those things
I think the batteries
that
are done.
become a part of everyday life. So I guess that's all I have here.
My name is Chantel Tucker. I am from North Little Rock. I live in Little Rock. I received an email about this event. I really didn't have any idea what I was coming into, so I'm really glad to be here. We did have some challenges with the weather being here, but we're here safely. Nevertheless, on Friday, I was speaking with a coworker about reparations, and he asked me a question, if there could be a dollar amount put on the injustices. And I said, no, not necessarily. But in terms of reparation, how I view it, I work in public health, so we're always talking about the social determinants of health. So when I look at reparations in forms of compensation, I think of equity. Level the playing fields. But then what I need is protection. Because what we've seen today, that it's evident that African Americans have made significant contributions. But what was the law to protect them and to allow them to maintain what they had achieved? So even today, if we are compensated and we become this great people, where's the protection from those who are empowered to just come in and take what they've been known to do in the past? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sarah Mooney, and I'm a rising second year at the University of Florida. And I do believe in the case for reparations, but I am a student and I'm still learning about everything. I'm currently reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' We Were 8 Years in Power, and I'm trying to gain a better understanding of the reparations. But as you were mentioning, I don't think there's truly any dollar amount or mediation that can be done to fix generational trauma.
Hello, my name is Anshul Shah. I just graduated from the University University of Florida.
Does it sound like interference?
My graduation is actually January 1.
Or maybe the battery. I think the battery might. Put that battery.
My family immigrated from Pakistan, so just like being in this area has really shown me kind of like the similarities. I know a lot of times the government here like really likes to downplay or just like talk poorly on the countries, like the country that I'm from. But just like driving around here, I've seen a lot of the areas here are pretty comparable to the rural areas in Pakistan where my family is from. So it's just shown me that even though like America thinks it's light years ahead, there's still so many issues here. Regarding the case of reparations, I do think it's long overdue. But again, what they both said, I don't really think that there's anything that can really just fix it. It might like put a band-aid on the wound, but I don't know. I'm just interested in learning a lot more.
Hello everyone, my name is Amanda Barrett and I'm a rising senior at the University of Florida. I'm just here to learn, because I've never been in a formal setting where people talked about reparations, so I just want to get other people's perspective. Sometimes my friends and I, we talk about reparations, and some of the questions we ask ourselves is that how will reparations be contributed? Like for example, will it be through grants? What about giving us land or property? So one of my goal to get out of this conversation is to learn people's perspective on how pretty much reparations will be contributed. Again, you can't put money on the generation trauma like everybody else was saying, but it's just if this was to continue, how will they determine who gets it, how it's given? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Barclay Key. I'm a historian at the University of Arkansas Little Rock. I've lived in Little Rock for 7 years now. I'm originally from Alabama, and so I've been visiting Elaine off and on for about 7 years. And so I think I'm here for a couple of reasons. One is just to keep learning, to learn more stories that I share with my students. Sometimes I teach Arkansas history, so of course we always discuss Elaine. But also, I'm here in solidarity, so away from my professional life. I'm here in solidarity with people who have been wronged, who've been cheated economically, but also because my grandparents were sharecroppers. My daddy started picking cotton when he was 5 years old. So I'm here because there's a lot of class consciousness in this room that I hope to share and participate in. And also because I want my kids to learn these stories.
All right. Hello. I'm Langston Key. I'm a freshman at Little Rock Central High School. And I'm here with my father because he encourages me to learn a lot more, and he fills that hole that schools often create with their teaching of history.
Hi, I'm Zora Key, and this year I'm going into 6th grade at Forest Heights. My mom had to work today, so of course I'm not making a story to bring us here, but I really do think that I've learned a lot. And he does these things often, but I'm pretty sure that we benefit from it.
Wow, good afternoon. My name is Nina Scape. I actually would have assigned you guys to school, especially for science, but okay. I used to work for the Little Rock School District before I started pursuing my master's in social work full time. So I'm in my last year, and I'm really glad to be here. My mother prodded us to come. We're from Helena, graduated from Central in 1990, and we moved to Little Rock shortly thereafter. But as a social work student, it's very important to have this conversation. Not necessarily here for reparations, but just what can I do to continue my career.
I'm George Lindsay. I'm here not because I'm trying to learn more about reparations, but I'm aware of some of the things that have done because of the disparities between opportunities that are available for one group of people and not available for others. Anytime people are there should be some compensation for it. And I know that we've been kind of programmed to say that monetary reparations are not necessarily or desirable. They are. When a person has been denied opportunities, they should be compensated for that denial. So I'm learning as I grow older. I'm an old guy now, but it's one thing to not stop learning and be aware of the fact that all of us need to learn more about fairness and the disparities that are stacked up against some people, whereas the things that we hope to try to do to improve the world for all of us, we should try to build on that every day. Thank you.
You're an old guy, but you're one old guy. Hi, I'm Regina Anderson Lindsay, and this is my husband, and this is my daughter. And I have a few words, but I want to say this. Reparations to me are a win-win situation. If I grew up in Helena, I chopped cotton, I picked cotton, I had an outdoor toilet, we had a 3-room house, a single mom and 4 siblings. I graduated from high school, went to college, my mother gave me $150. That's all she had. I had a scholarship. I left school, I returned to Helena and worked a couple of jobs, ended up teaching for 40 years. I retired from teaching a few years ago and met this guy and got married again. What I say is, then I got my master's in the middle of that. I'm a lifelong learner, and that's why I'm here today, because I got a flyer, and I called them and I said, we need to go. This is our area. The reason I say it's a win-win situation, if I, from a single parent, have been able to, and it's not the epoch of where I want to be, but if I've been able to not just educate myself, get an education, but make sure my daughter, my grandson, and that we tried to pull up from there with our limited resources, both reparation, both financial, cultural. I drank from the what? No, I tell you what, I drank from the white fountain because it was refrigerated. All right. And I looked up and saw the lady in the balcony and Jason Penny looking at me, and I was defiant enough to shake my head and drink again. I didn't know if something could have happened, but it didn't. But I say it's a win-win, because if we could do what we have done with what we had and have, what more could we do?
Thank you.
I just want to add, I don't know where William Quinney is, but he's head of the Reparations Committee. He'd add one word: give it back. All right.
So William Quinney would say, give it back.
Give it back. We know who stole it. We know when it got stolen. Give it back.
Well, everyone has had a chance to contribute. This has been incredibly educational for me, coming from the state of Florida. I know we are coming back, if you would like to have us back. The question now, though, to think about, I think, again, and I speak as an outsider, and I'm a very privileged place as a university professor now, but that question that Dr. King raised, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? I mean, if I could offer just a few words of summary, I'd like to kind of close on the point that you just made, which is reparations should be seen as a win-win situation. If you enhance the life of part of the community, if you see the nation as a community, if you enhance the life of part of the community, you're enhancing the life of all of the community. One of the problems that I grew up with, from where I came from, is I was taught in an educational system that said, if you win, I lose. And that was pounded into our heads. Talking about ROTC, so as a military veteran, we had a slightly different way of seeing that because all the people in my family were in the military. And I don't want to romanticize that, but we had more of a sense that if you win, I win. You know, if you're more secure, then I'll be more secure. But the problem in the society too often is that we are told over and over again, and I grew up in the 1970s. I was born in 1964. And how this is relevant, I think, is I was born in what they call the post-civil rights era. And there were many white individuals, white adults around me as a kid, and I would hear them say, the Mexicans are stealing our jobs, over and over again. And the same people would say, the Mexicans are stealing our jobs, and they're lazy. They're so lazy, and I would think, how can you be lazy? How can we be lazy and then steal your jobs? Doesn't seem to fit together. It doesn't make sense, does it? But there's a sense in the 70s, we call this the backlash era, that some white people, not all white people, felt that any gain that black and brown people had made through the civil rights movement was somehow their loss. And that's a big roadblock. You've got to help educate people out of that idea. So I love this point. It's a win-win situation. Now, as far as how you talk about it and implement it locally, I think the other term was mentioned, solidarity. Because Elaine is one town, one city. Phillips County is one county in the United States of America, or a much broader world. To get this thing done, we're going to have, if I understand all the comments, and I'm going to type these up, Dr. Olson, and get these to you. Solidarity, win-win, education. You'll never be able to, in terms of a dollar amount, what I've heard is, we'll never be able to come up with an exact dollar amount. We probably can't. But we can begin to think about what that would look like. Questions. One of the students mentioned, why? How are you going to do it? And I just want to say again, there are resources. Dr. Glenn Garrity, a brilliant economist at Duke University, has come up with a series of plans. One of them is about reparations for slavery, and the other important point may be made, and Jim Crow. Okay, so a lot of us have realized and have understood that you can't just talk about slavery.
Can we help you guys come out and join us in 2020? Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Lunch is being served in the back. If you really eat, just come through the line.